Today on Let's Find Out, we're joined by Adrian Miller, a two-time James Beard award-winning author who brings food, history, and culture together in ways that change how we see what's on our plate. From the White House to the barbecue pit, Adrian uncovers the stories behind American cuisine and the people too often left out of that story.
So I think sitting down for a plate of food, especially when it's really good, is kind of disarming. And you feel a kinship, at least to that other person, because of a shared common humanity.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Let's Find Out, Arapahoe Libraries podcast. Hear from authors, experts, and opinion leaders to spark ideas, solve problems, and enrich your life. In Arapahoe Libraries, we turn every search for knowledge into a helpful adventure. Well, Adrian, welcome to Let's Find Out, the Arapahoe Libraries podcast. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much. So good to be with you.
This will be a fun conversation. You have built this career at this interesting intersection of food and history and culture. What drew you to this type of work?
Well, the short answer is unemployment. The longer answer is a mix of unemployment and curiosity. So I was in between jobs. I had just finished a stint in the Clinton White House, and I was trying to get back to Colorado to start my own political career, because at that point in my life, I ultimately wanted to be one of our U.S. senators. And the job market was really slow because the internet bubble had burst. So I was in DC a lot longer than I expected, watching way too much daytime television. I'm embarrassed to tell you what shows I was watching, Mitch. Cherry. So in the depth of my depravity, I said, I should read something. So I went to a local bookstore, and I was in the cookbook section because I like to cook. And I found this book called Southern Food at Home, on the Road in History, written by a guy named John Edgerton. And I read that book. It was the first kind of culinary history I'd ever read. And he wrote the sentence that changed my life. He wrote that the comprehensive tribute to Black achievement in American cookery has yet to be written. And that's what started the journey.
And that started it off. Wow. So for listeners new to your work, what do you want them to understand about this deeper story behind American cuisine?
Yeah, just like, okay, so for most of my life, my deep thinking about food is, oh, that really tastes good. So one of the things is when you start looking at food, at a plate of food, it tells a story. It tells you something about that cook. It tells you something about the group they belong to, where they feel they belong to, where they identify their journey. Because these foods come from often places from around the world. So it's a deeper story that's very illuminating about that person's journey. And you can learn a lot more about a culture. And it's really interesting because a lot of foods that we think are deeply ingrained in a culture have only been there for maybe 500 years. Like, imagine Italian food without tomatoes, things like that. These are plants from the Americas that cross the Atlantic and get embraced in Europe and then become a part of that cuisine. So it's interesting to just see that story unfold through food.
There is something that's interesting that takes place when people share a meal, when they break bread, whether it's strangers or family. Why is food, do you think, such a powerful entry point for conversation? Sometimes conversation about things that are fun, and sometimes conversation about things that maybe aren't comfortable.
Right. Well, I think food is so elemental to the human experience, right? We all eat. And so that gives us a sense of commonality when we don't have that in so many other things. But I think things like food, music, sports, faith traditions, there's so many things that can bring us to a space where we can start to get to know each other. So I think sitting down for a plate of food, especially when it's really good, is kind of disarming. And you feel a kinship, at least to that other person, because of a shared common humanity. So I think in our society today, there's fewer spaces for us to come together, and the table is one of them. And I think, so you can sit down at a table, start to get to know somebody. And then when you start talking about food, it leads to so many other things. So I think the only thing we have to be mindful of is just don't talk with our mouths full, right? Because that would make our parents angry.
There you go. So in this rather unsettled world we are living in right now, do you think food can help us have more honest conversations?
Oh, absolutely. I think the challenge right now is just getting people to the table. But I think once you can get people to the table, I think it opens up a wide range of possibilities. So I talk about in many spaces about setting a welcome table. So that means creating an invitation where that person feels welcome to be who they are in that space. And you as the host, the person inviting someone, you have to realize, hey, you might hear some stuff you don't like, but if in order to have a truly welcoming space, you got to be able to hear that stuff and hear somebody out and understand their perspective and share. And then I think once you set that welcome environment, it just opens up the ability for us to form deeper connection and then have a shared sense of mission for our society. Because I think we're facing a lot of issues, right? And we can't do them by themselves. It has to be a collective effort. So whatever ways we can bring people together to say, hey, we're all in this together, I think is a good thing. And I just think food's a delicious way to do it.
Maybe it's a great place to start.
Yeah.
You have a lot of great books. Let's talk about some of these. Your book, Soul Food, it challenged a lot of assumptions that we may have about it. What's the biggest misconception people still have about soul food?
Yeah, and this one endures because it's also perpetuated by African Americans as well. But it's this idea that soul food is the stuff that white people didn't want, that Black cooks took. They were given the worst stuff, and then they made it delicious. And I understand why that narrative endures, because it's very powerful, right? It's just like it shows the ability to survive, the resilience, the creativity, all of those things. But when I started to look more deeply at food traditions in the American South, I discovered it's more about class and place than it is about race. So for the most part, people of the same socioeconomic status, wherever they are, they typically are eating the same foods or something very similar. Now, because of race, they don't eat together, but they're typically eating the same food. So when I found out that there are white Southerners who ate chitlins, and for those who don't know what chitlins is a contraction of chitterlings, which is animal intestines, usually pigs. A lot of cultures around the world eat guts. You know, in the United States, we're not feeling that so much. But to find out and that's one of the most emblematic aspects of soul food. There's nobody on the fence about chitlins. They either hate them or love them, right? You're never going to talk to somebody saying, yeah, I kind of like chitlins. Nah. But that was the prime example of African Americans getting the worst of something and making it delicious. And so, I'm trying to let people know, hey, there's a much more complex story when we talk about soul food, because it's bringing together West Africa, Western Europe, and the Americas in the American South in very interesting ways. And yes, it's a beloved cuisine because it's just so delicious.
I really enjoyed your book, The President's Kitchen Cabinet. There are so many great stories in there. You highlighted in that book African Americans who really shaped White House dining for the president and staff. So I'm curious, why do you think those stories were overlooked? And also, as a former journalist, how did you uncover those stories? Because they're really not widely documented or even recognized.
Right. So one of the main things is that unlike the foodie moment we're in right now, food has not been something celebrated. It was more a mark of servitude. Sure, you had celebrity chefs, but over the course of time, cooking in the home or in private spaces was women's work and wasn't valued. And then even in these high-end spaces, you had a lot of people of color who are on society's margins who were tasked to do that work. And even though they provided culinary excellence, they themselves were just never worthy of sustained celebration. So you may hear a word here or there about these cooks, but it was just a mark of servitude. And so because it was thought of as such, it just wasn't well documented. So a lot of food history, we're making educated guesses and we're just looking for clues here and there. So my journey for my books, the foundation is that I first relied a lot on historical newspapers. I love newspapers. They're a media that recounts the community life on a daily basis, right? So stories you're just never going to see in a book or some other forms of media, you're going to find in newspapers. So a lot of times these cooks were discussed in these newspapers. So that was the true gold mine. And then to round out my research, I read oral histories. So I read 3,500 oral histories of formerly enslaved people, looking for all aspects to understand of their food and how they connected to food. I read 500 cookbooks, half of them authored by African Americans, just to put Black food traditions in a larger culinary context. Read thousands of newspaper and magazine articles, talked to hundreds of people. And then because I care about my subject so much, I decided to eat my way through the country. So that's how I formed all of this research and got these stories together. And still, even with that, some of them I can only go so far because we just don't have a lot of information about them. But one thing I can say with certainty is that every single president of the United States, from George Washington to Donald Trump, has had African Americans cooking for them in some capacity. either in the White House basement kitchen, in the West Wing, when they would travel by yacht, plane, or train, when they would go to Camp David, or even when they would go someplace and visit. There were times when presidents would go to a place and a prominent family, in order to ingratiate themselves with the president, would loan their black cook to the president for weeks on end.
Wow. Well, as a journalist, I appreciate the digging that you had to do because, of course, if you work at the White House or work on Air Force One or on the train that carries the president, you're not exactly blabbing on the street what you've been up to. So there's hard facts to come by. So hats off to you for doing that.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, and I forgot the other thing that I did for that book specifically is that I did look at every presidential memoir that I could, because you would get references. And I did go to several presidential libraries and dig in their archives, because sometimes a president would take the time to actually talk about food. So the best by far was the Jimmy Carter Library. In that library, they actually have the daily menus for President Carter when he was in the White House. So you could pick a date. If he was in the White House, you'll know what he had for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Wow. Yeah, I just love the stories in there, of Washington's cook and Jefferson's and the exchanges that LBJ had or Jackie Kennedy. So it's a fun read, The President's Kitchen Cabinet. Now, your latest work explores Asian heritage chefs in the White House. What surprised you, or did anything surprise you in that research?
Yeah, so that book was an outgrowth of my Black Chefs in the White House book, The President's Kitchen Cabinet, because while I was researching that book, I was at the University of Denver Library. And they have a special collections that has a multi-thousand volume cookbook collection. And I just put in President's Food just to see what would come up. And a guy named Lee Ping Kwan, who was the presidential yacht chef for Warren Harding, Calvin Coolidge, and Herbert Hoover, wrote a memoir cookbook in 1939. There are not many copies around, and the University of Denver Library had a copy. So I read that and was fascinated, and that led me to just find out more about all of these Asian heritage people who cooked for our presidents. So most of them in the late 1800s, after the Spanish-American War, entered the U.S. Navy as a path to citizenship. And as people on the margins, because there was a lot of anti-Asian sentiment in our country for a long time, they were relegated to servitude positions in the Navy, which was being a cook. So the fact that there were so many people is what really surprised me, because for a long time after writing my first book, The President's Kitchen Cabinet, I thought, or my earlier book, I thought, okay, Black people have this on lockdown. We're the ones that are the definitive cooks. We've just dominated this field. And I can't say that any longer. There have been a tremendous number of Asian heritage chefs in all aspects of cooking. And like, for instance, President Eisenhower, his head cook was a Filipino towards the end of his second term. Didn't know that. So it was interesting to find out those stories.
Let's talk some barbecue, because you explore it a lot in your book, Black Smoke, which I love the title. How do you think barbecue really reflects a broader American history?
Because I think it's first, foundationally, it's based on Native American culinary techniques. Now, there are several people who don't agree with me. They think barbecue is either European in origin, West African in origin, or just part of a global tradition. But I think there's something very distinct about American style barbecue. So they're all wrong. But I just wanted you to know, in the spirit of just, intellectual integrity, just to know that there are other perspectives out there. But it's Native American, its foundation. And then later, Europeans and Africans get in the mix and build on this foundation to create something I feel is truly unique in the American South. And it was, in terms of party food, it was America's first big party food for large celebrations, because with a barbecue, old style barbecue, it was just a matter of finding enough land, digging a long trench, a couple feet wide, a few feet deep, chopping wood, filling that trench up with that wood, setting it on fire, butchering animals and butterflying them, sticking poles in them. And then somebody had to regularly flip them over that pit. Another person managed the fire, and somebody created the sauce. You could feed thousands of people using this, and the ways that you couldn't do with other things. Like, you couldn't do a seafood stew boil or fried chicken for 1,000, because that would be a logistical nightmare. But you could do that with barbecue. And what really made this possible was the use of enslaved African and then later enslaved African American labor. Early barbecue was enslaved Native Americans cooking, but Native American slavery didn't last long in the United States for a number of reasons. And so Europeans transitioned to African slavery. And so they were barbecue's early cooks. So by the time you get to the 1820s, 1830s, it is just known in the United States that if you want legit barbecue, you have an African American cook it.
In that book, Black Smoke, you explore kind of regional barbecue traditions. So let's talk about classic American barbecue. How did African American pitmasters really shape what we know today as American barbecue?
Yeah, so in those early years, you had African Americans primarily doing the cooking, and this lasts all the way through slavery. Then after emancipation, though, people still had a taste for barbecue, and you've got this group of people who've got a defined skill that most people don't have. And so in the latter part of the 19th century, African Americans with this skill set would be recruited and hired to go across the country to give people a taste of authentic Southern barbecue. And so as these cooks would travel around, some of them said, hey, you know, this place like Denver or Wisconsin or California, it's kind of nice. I think I might stay here rather than going back to the oppressive South. And so as barbecue starts to spread, African Americans are known as the go-to cooks. And I would venture to say until maybe the last couple of decades in the United States, most people who were experiencing Southern barbecue most likely had it cooked by an African American, whether they went to a Black-owned place or they went to a place where the African American cook was the primary cook in that place. So in terms of how barbecue tasted and developed, African Americans were a huge factor in shaping that cuisine.
You live here in Denver, but of course you also have worked at the White House and worked in policy. How did those experiences maybe shape your perspective as a historian?
Yeah, so being in the White House was transformative because you're at the height of government in the United States, and it forces you to have a broad perspective. So I think based on, I'm a lawyer by training. I tell people I'm a recovering lawyer. I think my skills as an attorney doing research and writing, the White House, so that was my foundation, but then the experience in the White House in politics and understanding various perspectives, managing conflict, all those other things, forced me to really consider how important context is and how important it is to step back and give a broader view of these trends as you tell the story so people understand, hey, this is how the story develops. But providing that context also creates an avenue for connection, because you could look at a story, a culinary story for a certain group of people, and you could say, hey, that's kind of similar to what's going on with my group. And I think, again, that creates connections. And if you're a curious person, I just love that kind of stuff. And so it's a very inviting way to look at history that I think, a lot of people may consider boring. Because I've had people come up to my talks and they're like, this is how history should be. It should be exciting. It should be interesting. And I'm like, you're right. I agree.
Yeah. There's a storytelling aspect to it. That makes it fun. It makes it, appealing. Right. So you've got a lot of great books. If someone were to start with just one of your books, which one would you recommend and why?
I would probably say Black Smoke as an intro, because my earlier books, I enjoyed writing every one of my books. They're all my children. But I think for just an introductory, in terms of the storytelling, weaving, and the history stuff, I think that's when I had some serious game with that book. Because, as a writer, you develop, you get better as you go along. Because even with my earlier works, as much as I love them, I'm like, man, I wrote that sentence. What was up with that? But yeah, I think Black Smoke is really for an entree into my work. I think that's a great book to start with. And I have to tell you this, the way I came up with that title, because I started thinking about writing that book in 2015. And at that time, the Catholic Church was considering a new pope. And I was watching CNN and the commentator said, yeah, we're just waiting for a puff of white smoke to signal that, and Black Smoke. That's how I came up with it.
Yeah, you talked about how your writing maybe has changed. This was going to be my next question. Has your approach to storytelling evolved from, say, your first work to your most recent?
Yeah, I would say that my writing now is much more personality driven. And I've always been concerned about or interested in telling a great story. And now I see that often rooting it in a person is a great way to start a story that can become complex because you connect people to other things. So I think I would say my writing is more personality driven these days, whereas my earlier stuff was more societal and contextual. I think that was definitely with my soul food, but then it started to develop more with the Black chefs in the White House because I was talking about these cooks, not a cuisine. And then with Black Smoke, even though I was talking about a cuisine, I thought the best way to tell the story was through the eyes of these people, to the extent that history gave me insight on what they were thinking.
Since food or sharing a meal can be so powerful, is there one meal or a food memory that kind of shapes who you are today?
I think the best way to understand me is through the New Year's Day meal that's traditional for Southerners and soul foodies. So typically, if you're connected to the South, typically on New Year's Day you need to have greens, dark leafy stewed dark leaves, and then black eyed peas. So the greens are for folding money. So the idea is that if you have greens the first day of the year, you'll have folding money the rest of the year. The
Okay.
black eyed peas are symbolic of either good luck or coins. And then pork is for good health. So people would have ham or chitlins. And then you would have other things like cornbread, candy jams. So that's a nice kind of meal. And I would add a red drink because red drink has very strong significance in Black culture. You have to understand, African Americans, when it comes to beverages, we don't call them cherry or strawberry or have hints of cranberry. It's just red.
Right.
So that meal kind of really explains me, because it's rooted in the South, even though I grew up in Denver. It talks about connection, and it's a really interesting way to show European influence on African American food traditions, right? Because a lot of these traditions of superstitions, I would say, of thinking that eating something on the first day and it would reverberate throughout the year, that's European. Africans really don't have that. So that's an example of embracing culture. So another example of just food telling a story in ways that you might not expect.
I have black eyed peas every New Year's Day for good luck, and my wife just rolls her eyes at me, but I still do it.
Wait, are you connected to the South?
My mom's side of the family, yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So you know about that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And she just looks at me like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "It's good luck. It's good luck." Yeah.
Well, look, I have to say, Mitch, after doing this tradition for 50 plus years, the prosperity results are very mixed. I don't know about you.
Yeah, that's probably true. That's probably true. But I'm not going to stop doing it. I'll tell you that.
Oh, no. It's too
Yeah,
delicious. It's too much fun.
exactly. Yeah, it's good stuff. All right, let's talk about. You're no stranger to awards. My understanding is you recently you were awarded a New York City Big Book Awards honor. Tell me what that was for and what that meant to you.
Yeah. So my co-author and I, Deborah Chang, won an award for the New York Big Book Award, which is prestigious, for Best International Cookbook. And this is for the Cooking to the President's Taste, Asian Heritage Chefs in White House History. So my latest book. So it was really cool to do that. So I recently went to New York and received the award. And so that was a lot of fun because there's so many great books out there. And to be nominated is a thrill. But to win is another additional thrill. So always grateful to, be recognized for the work that you do. Because when you're sitting there writing a book, you're sitting there, I don't know if anybody's going to dig this besides me. So that's why you write the book, right? For the love and the anticipation of sharing it with others. So to have it critically acclaimed is a great validation.
That's awesome. You're a James Baird Award winner, and now you've been nominated again. Tell me about that.
Yeah, you're a good luck charm. Just this morning, I found out that I've been nominated for a 2026 James Beard Media Award, because they do awards for chefs and restaurants, but they also have a category for media, and that's where I've won all of the James Beard Awards that I've won. So for feature reporting, so I wrote a book on a cookbook called Charleston Receipts, which is I think it may be the best-selling community cookbook of all time. They're close to 1 million copies sold for this cookbook that was published in 1950, and it's based in Charleston, South Carolina. So I wrote an article about the Black contributions and underpinning of that book, which over time has really not been valued and celebrated. So it was a joy to write that book and really show how Black cooks helped shape that iconic cookbook.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. Well, the award ceremony is on my birthday, so that might be one of the most amazing birthday gifts I could ever get. But again, just being nominated is huge. So I'll be ready into that space. And if I don't win, I will have my fake, I'm so happy you won instead of me look, that you see people at award ceremonies do.
Right. You have to have that face, right? All right, let's try a lightning round of questions. Quick questions, quick answers. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Your favorite comfort food?
Lemon icebox pie.
Ooh.
I don't
One
know if
dish
you've ever
every
heard of this.
No, I
Yeah.
haven't. Yeah, tell me about that.
Okay. Have you ever had key lime pie?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So imagine a key lime pie, which you have a lemon custard and with meringue on top, but the crust is crushed vanilla wafer cookies glued together with melted butter.
What?
It's amazing.
Stop.
It's something my late mother used to make. That's the dessert we kids always fought over. I don't have it very often, so that's why I picked that as my favorite because it's just so special when I can get it.
And if you have it on the weekend, the calories don't count, right?
No, right. Exactly.
All right, what's one dish everyone should try at least once?
I really believe it's Southern style greens because they're so versatile. First of all, they're versatile, so you don't have to make them with meat. But you can do it with traditional pork. You can do it with smoked turkey. You can take out the meat altogether, but it's very healthy. And it really tells a story about kind of African and European traditions coming together in the American South. When you look at West African cuisine, a lot of it is very plant-based, and a lot of dishes rely heavily on the leaves of plants. So I think it's a way to tell a story, and it's so versatile because it's healthy. You can make it in so many ways, and it's just plain delicious. And there's so many different ways to do it. Yeah, I know you have Southern roots. I don't know if you have a greens tradition. In my family, we do mustard and turnip greens together. We're not really a collard green family. Of course, when I go out, I'll eat collards, but mainly I do mustard and turnip greens. So I think everybody should try that once.
Let's talk barbecue. Sauce or no sauce?
Definitely sauce. And let me tell you, I have an attitude about all of these no sauce people. Now, I know why they say it. You know, you're hiding the meat or whatever. I can just tell you in African American barbecue culture, it's assumed that you know how to make the meat and you make it well. Your signature is the sauce. I have been to African American restaurants, barbecue joints, where my plate shows up and you look at it and it's an ocean of sauce with little islands of meat poking through. Islands is even strong, maybe like just little points of meat. That's how important the sauce is.
I agree with you. All right. Name a historical figure that you'd most want to cook for.
So this changes. So right now, especially after the Artemis 2 mission with NASA, I would like to sit down with Albert Einstein, cook a meal with him, and just get his thoughts on the universe. Because I'm just fascinated. The more we learn, it is just really fascinating. I don't know if he digs Southern food. I might have to, create a hybrid thing for him. Actually, you know what? He'll dig barbecue. So I'll probably make a barbecue meal for him. But I would just like to sit and learn and just find out what's going on with the universe. What's our best understanding of what's happening?
You enjoy cooking, but when you're short on time, what's your go-to meal?
When I'm short on time, it's barbecue. I'll go to a place that, has already made it because barbecue takes time. So if I could eat barbecue every day without any health consequences, I'm definitely doing that.
What's one food myth you wish people would just stop believing in?
So this one's related to soul food as well. It's that soul food is inherently unhealthy. That it needs a warning label. So a lot of people refrain from eating soul foods. They're like, oh, that's going to kill you. It's the leading cause of death for blah, blah, blah. And my thing is, if you actually take a closer look at soul food and listen to what nutritionists are telling us to eat, more dark leafy greens, more sweet potatoes, more fish, hibiscus, okra, these are all pillars of soul food. So really it's about portion control and understanding where the cuisine comes from. And sure, if you eat the fantastic celebratory parts of soul food, the fried chicken, the barbecue and stuff on a regular basis, that's not going to be good for anybody. But step back and look at this cuisine and let's just take a deeper look and be more comprehensive when we talk about these cuisines instead of just doing a lazy hot take and dismissing something.
Sweet or savory?
Oh, sweet every time, unfortunately.
Yeah, sweet tooth. All right. What is the best city for food in this country? And besides Denver, since
yes. Okay.
both live here, what's the top city for food?
I was going back and forth. I really think New York City, because you literally can have the whole world there. I mean, just random places that you just can't get anywhere. Like, for instance, in a place like Denver, there are West African restaurants, and usually they are featuring Ghana, Nigeria, or Senegal. But I was recently in New York in the Brooklyn area, and one day I went to a Romanian place for lunch, And then there was a Bolivian place called for a snack. And then there was a Filipino bakery. And these were all within a 10-minute walk of each other. And the other thing I love about New York City, in addition to having the world on a plate, is that there's different price points. So you can go to the fancy place, you can go to a mid-level place, and you can get some slamming street food for very cheap. So for all of those reasons, I have to say in the United States, it's New York City.
Well, Adrian, thank you. This has been a fun conversation. I appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, so to check out Adrian Miller's books about food, about culture and history, visit Arapahoe Libraries in person or online at arapahoelibraries.org.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Let's Find Out, Arapahoe Libraries podcast. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and visit us online at arapahoelibraries.org.